Sehr geehrte Teilnehmer, ich würde jetzt langsam
Dear participants,
anfangen mit der
I'd like
nächsten
to
Session.
get
Dear
started with the
participants, we are
next
about to start
session.
the next panel, but before that, I'd like to clarify a few things. And I switch to German again. I'm sorry, I need to switch to German. Also, ich spreche jetzt weiter in Deutsch. Ich wollte wissen, ob die Übersetzer schon da sind. Also jetzt spreche ich in Deutsch. Liebe
All right,
Teilnehmenden,
I'll be speaking
ein
in
paar
German now.
Fragen, die hier
Dear
gekommen sind. Wenn Sie
participants,
etwas
just a
in
few
den Chat
questions that
schreiben,
arise.
dann können
When
das
you
alle
have
sehen.
questions that
Wenn
you
Sie
type
es
into
so
the chat,
einstellen,
everyone
dass
will
die
be able
Nachricht
to
an alle
see it.
ist.
You can
Manche
also
von Ihnen
write when
stellen die
you write it to
Nachricht nur an die
all of the participants. You
Diskussionsteilnehmerinnen.
can also
Dann sehen es nur
write
wir.
private
Also wenn Sie
messages
etwas
to the
Gesamtes zur
panelists.
Prozedur sagen wollen,
Only
müssen Sie
we
in den
will
Chat
see them.
an alle
So if
schreiben.
you have
Wenn Sie
general
eine
questions, you
Frage
need
haben,
to
mit der Sie sich
address
beteiligen wollen,
all of the
stellen Sie die
participants. If
Frage
you
bitte
have
in dem
questions or
Bereich
comments,
Q&A
please
oder
ask them
F&A.
in the Q&A
Der ist neben dem Chat.
sector
Es gibt also einen Chatbereich und einen
next to the chat.
Q&A-Bereich.
So there's
Sie
a
haben
chat
aber auch die
area and
Möglichkeit,
an
sich zu
Q&A
beteiligen, indem
area.
Sie Ihre Hand
You
heben.
can
Dann
also
können wir
get
das
involved
sehen und
by
können Sie
raising your
dann hier
hand,
zum
and
Teil
we
in
can
diese
then
Diskussion
see your raised
hereinbringen.
hand and
Wichtig dabei ist, wir sind
bring
jetzt eine
you
größere
to
Gruppe.
our
Wir werden
panel
erstmal im
discussion
Themenkreis sprechen und
or
danach
involve you.
haben wir aber auch nochmal die Chance, mit Ihnen allen zu sprechen. Nur, dass wir das
We have a
einmal
few panelists
klar
here,
haben.
but you
Ich
will
freue
also
mich
get the
jetzt sehr
chance
für die
to get
nächste
engaged
Session. Sehr
with our
spannend, sehr viel zu
panelists
haben. Sind
later on.
jetzt
I'm
alle
very
hier
much
auf die
looking forward to
digitale
our
Bühne mit mir
next
bitte.
session
Das ist
with very
einmal
interesting
Markéta
panelists,
Fantová
Markéta
von der Prague
Fantová
Quadriennale. Es ist
from
Bozzini
Quadriennale
von
Prague,
FEAS oder
Jan
Charleroi Danse. Es
Bozzini
ist Nicolas
from
Dubourg
FEAS and Charleroi
von
Danse,
Syndeac.
Nicolas
Es ist
Dubourg
Sebastian
from
Brünger von der
Syndeac,
Kulturstiftung des
Sebastian
Bundes
Brünger from
und es ist
Kulturstiftung des
Ellerby vom Arts Council
Buches
in
und
England.
Andrew
Lieber
Belabel
Jerome,
from
wenn du
Arts
uns
Council England.
möglich, ja
Jerome,
wunderbar, jetzt können wir vielleicht fast sogar alle sehen.
excellent.
Genau, wenn es denn möglich
Now
wäre,
we
würde ich jetzt
can
fast
see you,
noch Annie sehen und Markéta,
and I like to see
Nicola.
Annie,
Und dann
Nicola,
sehen wir uns eben alle und dann können wir diese
Markéta, so we
Diskussion auch
can look into each
beginnen.
other's
Geht es oder
eyes
können wir, wir
and
können wieder,
start
ne? Wunderbar, jetzt fehlt Annie noch
our
und dann
discussion.
haben wir alle. Ich
Annie is
begrüße euch,
missing.
ich begrüße Sie. Großartig, dass Sie
A very
hier
warm
heute mit
welcome to
uns
all of
dabei
you.
seid.
It's
Es
great
ist
to
ja
have you with us
die
today.
große Schönheit der Online-Veranstaltung. Wir
The
können mit
beauty of
Menschen,
virtual
die in ganz Europa
conferences
verteilt sind, uns
is
treffen, uns
that we can
austauschen. Das war
gather
uns
with
wichtig.
people
Uns
all
ist aber
around
genauso
Europe
wichtig,
and
darauf
exchange,
hinzuweisen,
which
dass wir
was
uns im
very important
Oktober
to
in
us.
echt
And we'd
treffen
also
wollen
like
in
to point out
Straßburg
that
im
we'll
Theater.
meet in
Und
Strasbourg
vieles
in
von dem,
October
was wir
at the
heute nur
theater there
streifen können,
in
nochmal im
person.
Detail zu
So we'll
besprechen.
be able
Das
to
ist der Plan. Heute
go
treffen wir
more
uns
into
digital.
detail when we
Dann gibt
meet
es noch
in
einige
person.
Digitaltreffen, aber dann im
We
Oktober in
will have
Straßburg.
more
Heute
virtual
sprechen wir in dieser zweiten Session
editions of
über die
our
Frage,
sessions
was ist eigentlich die Realität
coming
im
up too.
Sektor? Was
And
ist das, was
today we'd
Sie
like
als
to talk
Akteur erleben,
about
wenn
your
Sie
reality
Nachhaltigkeit bei
in the
sich, bei Ihren
sector
Produktionen,
as
bei
a
Ihren
stakeholder,
Festivals, bei
as
Ihren
an actor
Formaten umsetzen
when
wollen? Und wir
working on your
fragen das
festivals, on your formats,
Institutionen, die
when
unter
implementing
anderem
them.
auch
And
fördern,
we
die also
like to
Ressourcen zur
ask this
Verfügung
question
stellen,
to
um
funding
Akteurinnen zu
institutions
unterstützen. Und ich freue
in
mich
order
heute sehr,
to
dass ich
support
spannende Sprecherinnen und
actors
spannende
in our
Panelists
sector. So
bei mir
I'm
habe.
very
Ich werde ganz
delighted to
kurz Sie
have
jetzt nicht
a whole
vorstellen, sondern Sie
range
bitten,
of
2, 3
very
Sätze über sich
interesting
zu sagen.
panelists
Das können Sie in der Regel
today
viel
with us
besser. Und
here.
meine erste
They will
Frage würde
introduce
gehen an
themselves
Sebastian Brünger
later.
von
My
der
first question goes
Kulturstiftung
to
des
Sebastian
Bundes in
Brünger from
Berlin in
Kulturstiftung des
Deutschland.
Bundes in
Und
Berlin,
ich beginne gleich mit der
the
ersten Frage an dich,
Foundation for
Sebastian. Ich hoffe, du
Culture
hast es
of
schon
the Federal
erwartet, dass du
Republic of
anfängst. Das war
Germany.
eben nicht ganz klar, aber ich finde es ganz
Sebastian,
gut.
maybe you were not
Wenn
aware
du
that
uns
you were
2, 3
going to
Sätze
start.
über die
But
Kulturstiftung des Bundes
anyways,
sagst
maybe
und
you
dann
could
wäre meine Frage, die
give
danach
a
sie
brief
anschließt,
introduction on
wie
your work,
kann man
on your
Kulturstiftung
institution,
des Bundes
and then I'd like
Akteurinnen
to ask you
unterstützen
how
bei dieser
your
Transformation?
institution
Welche
can
Hebel habt ihr identifiziert
support
und wie
actors
adressiert ihr diese Hebel?
with this transformation, and which levers do you see here? Thank you, Jakob. Thank you for this kind introduction here and for the invitation. My name is Sebastian Brünger. I am a scientific member of Kulturstiftung des Bundes, and I used to work as a dramaturge at the theater, and I've been working a lot in the field of sustainability. We are a funding institution funding innovative programs in the international context. We have 35 million euros of funds available annually, and we are at a turning point at the moment, because promoting culture in arts according to our constitution is rather the responsibility of our Länder, the Bundesländer, the states of regional states of Germany. So it's rather our role to set impulses. There are topics such as diversity, digitization, but also economic sustainability, which applies to us as a culture foundation for culture, as an institution, and we've been involved in this climate management program called EMA, when we have our annual report, but it's also linked to the climate crisis, but also linked to the production conditions of art, where we try to give incentives to work more sustainably, but we are probably still at the beginning. Here in Germany, we receive a lot of questions in this regard. How can we get started? What are the levers? Jakob, you've been part of this important initiative within Germany, also in collaboration with federal associations, the Association for Theatre. And last year we started a pilot project
im deutschen Kultursektor zu erproben. Darunter waren auch einige Theater mit unterschiedlichen Vorkenntnissen und Größen. Und ein zweites Förderprogramm, ein größeres Förderprogramm,
it's an accounting method for sustainability, and it was not only about accounting in the culture sector, where we try to set incentives to become more climate neutral and combining cultural work with climate action. Because there's always the big question how sustainability can be implemented in the whole funding system, not only with us, with our foundation, but also in other parts of Germany, which is why the Fonds Zero is an important initiative, as we work a lot on a regional, federal state level, where we have to introduce binding tools to set new directions. And I hope that we can identify best practices also with our conference in autumn and bring together different actors, finding out more about their expectations in the culture sector.
Vielen Dank, Sebastian.
Thank you, Sebastian. Andrew, as you just heard, the Kulturstiftung des Bundes, the Foundation for Culture of the Federal Republic in Germany, is still in the beginning of its sustainability work, but the Arts Council is probably much more experienced already in this regard. So this is why I like to find out what your experiences are when dealing with funding and bringing funding together with sustainability. And I'd like you to be frank. You've already took a lot of different paths that we may have to take now.
Thanks, Jakob. Arts Council has been working in this field for well over 10 years with our environmental partner, Julie's Bicycle, who I'm sure many of you are aware of. In 2012, we brought in an initiative which was to work with our regularly funded organisations. And that initiative was that we expected all of those organisations as part of their contract to report their environmental data and provide us with an action plan and policy on an annual basis. So we've been collecting that data now for 10 years, which means we have a pretty robust and wide-reaching data set. Our 2017-18 annual report showed us that between 2012 and the 2017-18 period, we'd supported through that programme a 35% reduction in carbon emissions, a 23% reduction in energy consumption, which resulted in about £16.5 million in avoided energy costs. So we have the data and the science to back up the model and the change that we are trying to affect. But it's not just about data, and the cultural and creative sectors are about way more than that. They're a powerful voice, they're powerful advocates, communicators, storytellers, and we move forward with the cultural sector, with their support, trying to address other ways that the cultural sector can respond to the climate crisis as well. So after the 2017-18 report, we launched 2 programs in response to this. The first being a data-based program, and that was to work with our top 30 organisations, which accounted for 50% of the carbon footprint of our portfolio. Bearing in mind that the portfolio is over 800 organisations, 30 organisations being responsible for 50% seemed a good place where we could continue to make big gains. So that program was called Spotlight. It's based on science-based targets, and we've just released the first report on that, which showed an increased reduction in the carbon footprint of those specific organisations as opposed to organisations who were on that science-based target program. So it shows that that can work as well. And we launched another program which was called Accelerator, and that was very much a peer-led, culturally sector-focused program. So it was about giving the voice and the autonomy back to the sector, and asking them what projects they would like to explore and how they would like to embody leadership. So again, it was kind of handing back the power, or devolving the power from Arts Council being a parent-child relationship to being one of equality. And most recently, we launched an additional program called the Colour Green Lab, which is focused on climate justice, making sure that people from underrepresented communities are represented properly within this conversation, and it's a training program for those voices. So Arts Council has been working in this area for quite a long time. In 2012, I wouldn't say it was easy to implement, and there was some resistance from the people that we fund saying this is just extra work, we don't see what our responsibility in this area is. But now it's kind of really switched to the other direction, and those cultural organisations are saying to us, we want to do more and you need to support us. What does that look like? And in a world where there's limited finances, it's not always easy. So it's not that we're kind of moving away from data, and data will always remain important, and we're always going to be asking organisations to level up their approaches to the reduction of their carbon footprints. But we're also wanting to, as an organisation, to give an equal standing to the programming side of it, to the cultural voice, and to the power of the movement, to activism through culture, as a way to continue moving this conversation forward. And Arts Council invests around £510 million a year across all of its programmes. And I say that just to bear in mind that the programmes I've spoken about so far are only with our national portfolio organisations, which is our regularly funded contract organisation, so about 800 and something of them. But we also have many other strands of funding into the environmental side of those as much. So yes, potentially we do have a bit more experience in some areas of funding, but in terms of project funding, we're very much actually at the beginning of that journey as well. So that's a really interesting new frontier and exciting, challenging frontier, because effectively we're starting from 0 to 10 again, instead of being at 80%. And there's a lot of education to do. And we're not just talking about 800 organizations that we can focus on and have a contract with. We're talking about thousands of individual artists, performers, small scale organizations, where we can have influence in supporting their carbon literacy, in supporting the ways they approach this subject matter. So yes, we have some leadership and some kind of forward moving bits on other organizations, but equally we are at the curve of learning as well with everybody else.
Vielen Dank für diesen Einblick in die Aktivitäten des Arts Council. Wir kommen da drauf.
Thank you so much for the insights regarding the activities of Arts Council. We'll come back to it in a few moments. Nicolas, you have several functions. You work with Syndeac, an organization from France, but you also work with a theater, so you're also an actor.
Dich fragen wollen, welche Rolle spielt Syndeac?
And I'd like to ask you which role Syndeac plays in the cultural sector in France regarding the sector's transformation. So Syndeac on the one hand, and secondly, as someone working in theater, do you represent the same position or would you have to take a different position here?
Aujourd'hui, donc la question qu'on doit se poser tous ensemble, c'est effectivement face à cet impératif de transition écologique, qu'est-ce qu'on est capable de faire? Tout à l'heure, Herman a introduit la discussion en disant qu'il y avait des solutions faciles et qu'il y avait des solutions difficiles. Et on s'est vite rappelé à ce moment-là les phrases un peu, les slogans d'il y a 20 ans.
That comes with challenging answers. 20 years ago, we would say, think big, act small, but that's not enough anymore nowadays. We have to think big today and act massively. We have to take one more step and bring it to the next level. And as a director of the theater, I'm also a member of a trade union called Syndeac, which brings together the management of theaters and different arts organizations, being a circus, theaters, arts in general. So it's about the sector of
les scènes nationales, les centres dramatiques nationaux, les centres chorégraphiques, etc.
in France, whether it's centers for scenography, for street art, for circus art, a lot of different actors that come together, and on their individual levels, they've already implemented a lot of different projects dealing with sustainability. So we have to ask ourselves how we can speed up the transformation in this regard. What is a trade union now?
à défendre les théâtres vis-à-vis des institutions
it defends the framework with regard to its institutions, so it defends a certain model of organization and also acquiring funding, but as
les salariés, les artistes et les techniciens, etc., pour organiser les conditions.
An employer, we're also here to provide a dialogue between different stakeholders and employees, employers. It's about funding, it's about the political level. And when we talk about ecological change or transformation, we talk about a very complex issue, because we have to find a holistic approach here. What I ask myself here is, on the one hand, we have to deal with the complexity of the ecological transformation, zero carbon industry approaches. And as cultural sectors, we also have to imagine what tomorrow's system may look like. What I liked was what Michel Coco said: a social, scientific aspect when thinking about ecological transformation. We also have to think about ecological transformation in society in the future.
Mais aujourd'hui, on doit en même temps que réfléchir à ça, essayer de construire l'épistémé de demain. Essayer de se dire que c'est par l'art, la création, que vont peut-être...
We also have to shape the future. This is going to be of crucial importance moving forward.
Bien plus radicales pour résoudre les problèmes qui sont face à nous. Donc,
we need radical answers to the questions that are facing us. I know that we've been talking a lot about transportation, traveling, and the question with respect to our European identity. All of this is important to think about. I think 500, 1,000 years ago, we would have been asking different questions because we all came together in very different ways.
Et que la responsabilité des artistes, c'est d'essayer de construire les conditions.
Artists have a responsibility. They need to create frameworks in order to change the system.
Modestement, regarder les contradictions et ce qui nous empêche d'agir. Et je dirais que c'est à deux niveaux.
Our union took a look at the main challenges and what is preventing us from making the necessary steps. The biggest problems that we noticed are, for example, when we're trying to make climate positive actions, there's the policymakers level, national level, and all of these levels are not always in agreement. There are lots of goals that are in contradiction with one another at the same time. And then we have financing structures that are sometimes in contradiction with one another. We need to make progress here, but in doing so, we have to comply with criteria that is in competition with one another or contradicts one another, and that's a challenge for us to overcome these contradictions and work within these systems that, as I just said, are quite contradictory at the same time. So we need to take a look at production, how we're distributing our work, who's going to shoot work, are there going to be more festivals, fewer festivals, will there be more tours, fewer tours? We also are asking ourselves how we're paying our artists. Are they going to be able to live if we're giving them less money, or not rather less money, but paying them for fewer tours? We need to be able to defend our approaches that we're taking, of course, and take a look at what type of effects our climate protection measures will have on everybody in the society. How will our artists be able to carry on living if we make certain changes?
Suivi la fermeture des mines dans beaucoup de pays du Nord, bien sûr en Belgique, en Angleterre ou ailleurs.
Do you all remember the catastrophe that took place in North England when mines were closed? This societal factor when these mines were closed was not something that was taken into consideration at the time, and we need to now take into consideration the effect that our measures will have on artists, and how can we accompany artists and make sure that they don't suffer as a result of the measures that we do take. So what would we like to contribute today? We want to ask ourselves a question about the different complexities surrounding these issues, that we provide all of the actors, players, with the support they need throughout the entire cultural sector, and we also need to pinpoint the difficulties. In addition to committing ourselves quickly, as quickly as possible, within the next year, hopefully, to these priorities that hopefully moving forward we'll be able to clearly define. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Nicolas. Ich finde es spannend, weil du mehrere Perspektiven eingebracht hast, die sehr wichtig sind.
So thank you very much, Nicolas, for those very crucial points. It's important to take a look at the prospects for the artists, how they're going to be affected by the measures that we take, who are going to be accompanying this transformation, of course. Now I'd like to move over to Annie Bozzini, who, similar to Nicolas, finds herself in a double position here, a double role. She works for FEAS and Charleroi. She is an artist at the same time and also represents the interests of artists. So I'd like to ask Annie now to describe what she does in her work. And quoting Nicolas, what types of frameworks do artists need in order to change the system?
Annie, du bist, glaube ich, noch stumm.
Annie, we unfortunately can't hear you. You need to turn on your microphone.
Si j'active pas mon micro, évidemment. Voilà. Alors,
sorry about that. Without a microphone, it doesn't work.
C'est une fédération des employeurs
Now you can hear me. So the FEAS is an association for artists. We're not a union.
Notre seule priorité, je dirais, on est installé plutôt dans un rapport.
We provide social support to artists, similar to the work done by Nicolas's union, but that's not our task, so to speak, or our mission, rather. We bring people together and ask the same questions that we're asking today. We represent the institutions as well. The FEAS is smaller than Syndeac. We're in Belgium. We're in the French-speaking region in Belgium, so we're just a rather small group. We have 70 employers that are within our association, and they're very different employers. So, head of a theater, for example, but it's a very diverse group. But we're also talking about sustainability, of course. I'm vice president of the association, and I'm here on behalf of the president today. Right now, we're in a very active phase when it comes to sustainability. We have a group, one person from the FES is there, along with experts. And in this group, we are asking the same sorts of questions that we're dealing with today, so sustainability-related questions. We're also talking about wellness, that's another issue, nutrition, of course. So what should we give our audience, you know? What should we give them to eat when they come to the theater, what they should be eating or what they should be greeted with in terms of food at festivals? We're also talking about eco-design. I don't really like the word itself, but this is something that's quite important for the actors, or rather the players in the sector. We need to take a look at how we work and how we can create decor that can be reused, that isn't something that's just thrown out or not necessary anymore after the end of a production. We have a person that has been specifically hired to come up with eco-design, so design that can be perhaps recycled or reused, materials, all about reusing things for different creations. Even though we're a small group, there are large costs associated with our work, and so if we can come up with ways of reusing material for set designs, for example, this is something that can, of course, save costs for the theaters. Digitalization is also an issue we're taking a look at. We can't ignore this topic. It's of utmost importance nowadays. So as you can see now, we're meeting online, and that feeds into this topic. And the fourth topic is, of course, sustainability, which we've talked about today at length. We could talk about it all day, but I'd like to mention a different topic. I work together with a man who works at the University of Lausanne, and we work on the topic of working hand in hand with theater directors in order to create sustainable shows and sustainable pieces, theater pieces. We are making real progress. On the 28th of October, we'll be in Brussels. There'll be an event there. It's a conference with the different actors and artists that we represent, in addition to experts who can enrich the group with their experience and knowledge. As artists, there's a great deal to be done, many things to think about, and we need support when asking ourselves these types of questions. We need to bring in the experts. I don't know what the results of this conference in October will be, or of this project, but our Ministry of Culture is led by the Greens Party here in Belgium, and it is very much supporting our project, which is great.
Notre responsabilité, elle est évidemment, c'est pas nous qui allons faire baisser le taux, il faut quand même être assez honnête là-dessus. Je pense qu'on peut faire le maximum.
We have a responsibility, and I think we need to be honest. We can do a great deal, but we're not the ones that are going to be the real solution to the sustainability issue. But what we can do is symbolic, and that's important. That can have a huge, huge impact. Therefore, it's open to keep our ears and eyes open. These indicators are important, as we discussed, but facts and figures are not everything. There's our environmental impact, but there's also our symbolic impact, and that's something we should take a look at. Now back to sustainability. So sustainability with respect to art, and sustainability with respect to our public, our audience. So I'd like to give you an example of Charleroi, where I work. We have 50 artists that come here for a week. They come here with the bus. It's great. When they come all in one bus, that's even better, with respect to the CO2 emissions, of course. And then we took a look at our public, where they're coming from. They're traveling far and wide. And we saw that half of the people coming traveled 72 kilometers on average just to see our work. In the world of performing arts, we have a problem. We have to try and be close to our audience, to our viewers. And this is something that Nicolas also has said.
Dans le cadre de ce théâtre Vidi sur un spectacle dit durable, mais en même temps, évidemment, on voit toute l'ambiguïté qu'il y a là-dedans. C'est notre difficulté, je pense, dans les prochaines années, va être, et tu l'as dit tout à l'heure, les blocs de
contradiction. But on the other hand, mobility is an issue that we have to take a greater look at. And there are lots of contradictions here, as Nicolas said. There's many contradictions.
Nous allons faire de positiver les entraves, comment nous allons positiver les entraves, comment nous allons de ces nouvelles.
So we have to ask ourselves how we can move forward in a positive way, particularly when there are so many contradictions at play.
Aujourd'hui, nous sortons à peine d'une crise grave.
So we're just, on the tail end of a difficult time, the pandemic, and now the next crisis is right at our doorsteps, and we have to ask ourselves the next set of questions. I'd like to give you an example of one of them. This pertains to light. So we've done a lot with respect to light. We've incorporated LED lights, for example. But with COVID and the pandemic, we then realized we had to, open the windows all the time to let in fresh air. But we have an air conditioner. So this honestly just drains our energy, opening our windows with the air conditioner on. It's just making up for the environmental footprint that we're saving by introducing LED lights. So we're making a lot of efforts, but if you look at what our bottom line is at the end of the day, we might not actually be making progress on paper, unfortunately. So it's great to see, however, that we all have the desire to work, to make changes. But I have the feeling every time that we discover something new, there's always something more difficult hiding behind it. Well, what can we do? What's something that can be done?
Un milieu autour de ces questions-là, pour toutes ces raisons-là, c'est-à-dire que une chose arrive avec son contraire en permanence.
We need to mobilize people and motivate people, and that's something that's challenging. Sure, we can say things like, we're not going to eat any more meat, but then we need to harvest more soybeans. There's never a good solution. There's lots of contradictions as stated, and this is something, unfortunately, that I think we can come to expect for the future as well. The question is bringing everybody on board, and how can we do that? It's difficult to do. We don't know how we can do that, but nevertheless, we still need to make progress and try our very best. Thank you. Thank you very much, Annie. I think it's really important to take a closer look at those contradictions and to describe them in greater detail. You described something from your experience, and I'm sure that a lot of people have had the same experiences or similar ones. Therefore, I think it would be helpful for all of us to take a closer look at that. So we heard from players from Germany, from France, Belgium, and the United Kingdom. And I'm happy here to have Markéta from Prague. So it'd be nice to hear some of your thoughts and what's happening in the Czech Republic.
Sind diese Themen, die du gehört hast, sind die auch
I have a question. The topics that you've just heard from us today, are these topics that are really present for you in the Czech Republic, or do you have other issues that are really of burning importance in the Czech Republic? How are you doing things at the Quadriennale?
Oh, hello, it's a pleasure to be here. And yes, we do have the same issues that we're trying to tackle. Prague Quadriennale, as the name suggests, is a festival that happens every 4 years. So right there, while talking about something like a carbon footprint, we have over 8,000 professionals and artists that we try to get to Prague. So what we decided is that the meeting in person is very important to us. And then the fact that we're doing it every 4 years is already helping to offset certain things. And we keep the platform active in between those 4 years. But yes, we had a major discussion about the carbon footprint and the travel. We are encouraging our visitors as well as our artists and our participants to use any means of travel that are friendly to our environment. So that's one of the things. But the major changes that we have been trying to do are twofold. They come in our framework, and that word happened, and we heard it many times already. But I mean the artistic framework, and by that I mean mission and vision. Prague Quadriennale has been around since 1967, which is a year before the Russian invasion to Czechoslovakia, actually. Which means that it happened behind Iron Curtain. And its own structure has been also affected by the time where it was established. It is organized by the Minister of Culture of the Czech Republic. And we made a very significant change. We have moved from something that used to be national exhibition-driven festival to a festival where we have still exhibitions of countries and regions, but and lots of other projects surrounding it that are dedicated to performance design, scenography, and performance space. But we went from seeking the best and what we were called the Olympics of performance design, and seeking the best stars from our field, to actually looking at emerging trends and emerging tendencies in our field, which the pandemic made large changes in the area of scenography, meaning that a lot of theater started to happen, a lot of performances started to happen outside of original theater buildings. And with that trend, which has been happening before, by the way, a lot of amazing ideas that have to do with sustainability emerged. So by changing our main mission to really follow these new developments. And if I use a metaphor of, let's say, football, instead of building a giant football stadium for top teams, we have decided to use a small play field and invite all the small players and all the emerging wonderful players to it. It goes down to our choice of the space. So Quadriennale happens every 4 years in a different space. And we chose this time an area of former Prague, a slaughterhouse, which became a market later on. But it's an area that is facing a major plans for gentrification that might also affect the current community that is part of that. So by changing our mission and vision, and also looking at the spaces where we do our exhibition and try to do some awareness and bring an awareness to certain situations, that is our way how we can help and support. So that's one area where we're trying to be very active. The other one is in the organization of the festival itself. So yes, we're looking at using environmentally friendly processes, from food to recyclables that we use for our visitors, and we have 70,000 of them, so it's a lot of people who pass through our spaces, to the materials that we use. And there comes a word which is, there's a new, I would say, a field that's called eco-scenography. And it has to do with the way how we build our exhibitions and also how we speak to the exhibitors, which means the countries and regions that are bringing their own exhibitions to Prague. And we're asking them to use environmentally friendly materials, but also we are aware that they're shipping their materials to Prague. And we have a resale after the exhibition, and we're trying to recycle pretty much all the materials that we end up having at our exhibition. So those are some steps that we're actively taking and we had done in 2019. And I have to say that we managed to sell all of our exhibition building materials to entities here in Czech Republic and managed to recycle quite a large quantity of what we had. Where we found some serious challenges were in the area of recycling. That seemed to be an incredibly difficult thing to tackle in a large size of a festival because there seems to be more emotions than I would say scientific knowledge about how these things need to be done by the organizers that are helping us, for instance, like the cleaning section or the recycling section. So that's been absolutely challenging and we're trying to tackle that, but it's not going super well. And we're open to any suggestions anybody has in the world. And the third tier that we're trying to follow is goes right down to the artists. We are also drawing ideas through our open platform that runs in between PQs that is inviting artists who are working in an eco-friendly way, because performance design and theater has been quite ingenious in already developing a lot of methods for centuries in a way, because in order to survive in theater, small theater companies had to do all kinds of things. And it's really great sometimes to have discussions, which we call PQ talks, about these themes and discover that something that we're seeking nowadays and we're desperately trying to get has been around already. So it's also recycling of ideas. That's something that we're trying to get into. And we're aware that we're somewhat of an influencer because there's no festival of the same kind dedicated to the same thing. So we simply know we don't have a major, I would say we don't have a major union or a supporter who would be helping us understand how these things are developing around us. We simply have to be conscious ourselves. So we as a team, and we belong, or we are part of Arts and Theatre Institute in Prague, we have discussions about that and simply trying to find the best ways around and try to do the best practices we possibly can. Not all of it is possible, but we are changing and we're trying. And that's all I can say about where we're at.
I would love to add another question to you, Markéta. These initiatives you've been describing, are they funded by your funders or do you put them on your own resources?
No, they come on the back of our own resources, which is why we always have to try to apply for European Creative Europe and other possible grants as well, because it really adds to the budget tremendously. So this is something that we have learned, that it takes money to be environmentally conscious. And it doesn't take small money. So that's why we're starting small. And that's why I think the actual framework that we're mentioning here is very, very important, which is revision of mission and vision of some of these large festivals, and maybe look at collaborations and cooperations and the frequencies with which we do those. So I think it's probably the less or least painful part, maybe in some way.
Thank you very much. Herman, I understood you have a question edition impulse.
Oui, merci Jacob, merci à tous. Je voudrais faire juste le lien avec la première table ronde et peut-être vous renvoyer la question dans ce que nous ont dit Barbara Gessler.
Very briefly, to come back to what Barbara Gessler said.
De privilégier l'incitation à l'obligation, à la réglementation.
We want to encourage people. We don't want to force them.
Sebastian Brünger, que pour l'instant le fonds Zero est un fonds aussi
which is something that I learned from Sebastian Brünger too. Your work is based on an experiment. You're also asking yourselves in which format these decisions shall be made. There's also a real shift. regarding your relationship with the different actors. They're not so afraid of sustainability anymore. They really want a framework to work with. So I'd like to ask you, what's your approach here? Shall we force people to change? Do we need a binding framework, or shall we encourage them? Who'd like to answer? That's a very good question. I'd say, do we need a regulatory framework? Does it help or not?
Encore une fois, je pense, et pour avoir écouté Bruno Latour, encore une fois, qui a donné le titre à cette intervention, je me demande où est le plaisir quand même. Il va peut-être falloir se poser cette question-là, parce que
Bruno Latour shaped the title, or provided us with the title of this event. So when we think about whether to encourage or to force people, maybe this question has to be asked in a different way. I'd say it's not enough when we think about our children and grandchildren. It's not enough incentive for everyone. It's also a question of means. Somewhere there may be existing funds. And for me, it would be interesting to see those funding partners gather together and communicate, because sometimes I feel that we are left alone. We are sitting in our corner without any sort of support. We have to find funding for everything by ourselves, on our own. It's always a question of money. Money makes the world go round, and we know that funding is available. The question is, how can we improve our production? How can we live up to the question of mobility? I mean, artworks have to become famous. That's important. They have to travel. It's also a question cannot be seen anywhere anymore or experienced. It's a question of happiness. We want people to be motivated, but sometimes it's hard to motivate them.
On s'est beaucoup moqué des gens qui, effectivement, des véganes et tout ça, parce que la notion de plaisir n'était pas forcément là toujours. Mais je pense qu'il va falloir se poser cette question-là.
We used to laugh at vegans because we simply asked whether they were happy, but we have the same question that we face nowadays. We know what we have to do, but we don't really know whether we will enjoy shifting away from our habits or trying something new.
Oder Glücksanreize an Sebastian, danach Markéta und dann Nicolas.
Sebastian, Markéta and Nicolas. Thank you very much for this question, which I took with me from the first round, and the Foundation for Culture had some funding directories, funding directives. They called out to to stakeholders, but from the German side, I'm often told, please force us to do so, because when you only have funding directives, it may not be binding enough, so it may even be desirable to have a bit of obligation here. I worked at the Arts Council with Julie's bicycle, and I was so overwhelmed by the energy that I felt in London. You were very strong here when you said, if you want funding, we want you to provide us with figures, with data. And that's great because it creates a dynamic momentum which really makes the sector thrive. What we also need is communication and funding available in this regard.
Verbote, zu sagen, das alles darf jetzt nicht mehr stattfinden, weil die Widersprüche sind schon benannt worden.
It's not so much about prohibitions or bans. It's rather about encouraging actors to make more conscious decisions. So if I take a certain flight, I may want to leave something else out, for example. Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you for your ideas. Now I'd like to give Markéta the opportunity to answer this question. Do we need regulations? Do we need a legal framework? That might cause this enthusiasm that we...
Well, I'm a firm believer in some sort of positive motivation. So we already talked about finances being something that is in addition to making some of the steps. So it's very hard to really be forced and not having financial support for making the steps. So that's one of the things. And I just wanted to mention that it also very much depends who is on the end of the decision making and who is creating those policies. Because we witnessed one of the very difficult moments where the EU decided that it would be that it's important to use only certain type of lighting bulbs, for instance, and completely forgot that there is this whole theater sector that is using a very different types of lighting, and it wasn't covered by that policy. And theater manufacturers or the lighting manufacturers were hit real hard for a while. So there's been a backlash. So I think exactly as you already mentioned before, I think communication, if there is supposed to be policy, there needs to be communication and inclusion of all the particles that will have to deal with the results. So I think that's really important from my end, I think.
Thank you very much. Andrew, what's your position on that topic? I reckon there is one.
there is one. I mean, it sounds from what I was saying before, the Arts Council forced the people that we fund to report their data and give us action plans and policies. Actually, that's not the case. It is part of the contract they have with us, but it's much more of a situation where we encourage people to do that and to build trust and knowledge and experience to move that forward as a sector together. What Arts Council does do is provide the frameworks and models and the tools and the training to give people the confidence to overcome their concerns or their worries about how to do this. And in that's where we create a really strong bond and relationship, I think. It's worth remembering that Arts Council's money comes from the government and from the National Lottery, which means the people that we fund directly do have social responsibilities in terms of what they do with that money. And the environment has to be one of those things at the minute. You can't ignore the fact that this is the most important issue at the minute and will continue to be for the foreseeable future. So we create those conditions, we expect organizations to respond to it, We love it when they do, and we love it when they take it even further and go beyond our expectations. But now we're at a situation where, you know, a lot of organizations have done everything they can do in terms of their buildings. So without massive capital investment, which we're talking hundreds of millions of pounds to decarbonize the capital infrastructure in the UK, now we're looking to support organizations to move forward in the ways which best suit them. And the problem, I think, with having too many policies and frameworks or expectations is that everybody's on a different point of their exploration, their journey. They have different capacity, different financial responsibilities, and different audiences. I mean, just what Annie was saying before about people traveling to venues, you know, in London, that's not really a big issue, but as soon as you get into rural England, that is the only way that people get to see art and culture and theatre. So I think there's a lot of pros and cons for the idea of forcing somebody, but I'm always really interested in the idea of inclusion and a joint way of working rather than forcing somebody to do something, which is the position that Arts Council takes and continues to develop at the minute. Thank you. Thank
you very much. Dear panelists, I'd like to open up that discussion now to the participants. So participants, we're going to continue here with Nicolas, but just if you have something to add, if you have a question, you can either raise your hand or type your question into the Q&A section, then we will get you up. But Nicolas, please go ahead.
Oui, je voulais réagir sur cette question contrainte et incitation.
I just wanted to respond to that.
Un sujet majeur.
Being forced to do things or rules, yeah, that's an important topic.
D'analyser aujourd'hui le système de la production et de la diffusion des spectacles, des formes d'art dans le spectacle vivant.
We try and analyze the production system or the distribution system, we can see that there's a certain ecosystem here. It's a rather complex ecosystem. We have, you know, the state involved in this ecosystem, so the policymakers. In the case of France, we have the Ministry for Culture, then there are the different regions, the departments in France, and then we have the theater, and then on the other hand, the artists themselves. And they're just trying to produce their art. And all of us together are trying to produce art. If we take a look at the different incentives that are present, we note that the incentives need to be attractive for everybody in this ecosystem. We can't just incentivize one player in the ecosystem without taking a look at everybody else, because we don't want to throw everything out of balance. So if we want to bring everybody on board, we need to have a vision of a global ecosystem, and constructing such a vision is complex. It's a complex task. So creating culture needs to go hand in hand with distribution or the distribution thereof. In Europe, we come across this low-cost ecosystem. So distributing art 20 or 30 years ago, what did it look like? Well,
qui sont liés à des grandes chaînes hôtelières et qui coûtent très peu cher. Donc on a pu développer tout un système de la mobilité.
Just travel from Berlin to Paris. That's something we did in the 50s, for example. And in both of these locations, there was art that was being produced. But beyond Paris and Berlin, there's another ecosystem that has to do with this whole industry. And there's another ecosystem that's existing that has nothing to do with our industry. So we need to understand where we can incentivize people and which groups we're incentivizing, while at the same time refining these incentives to make them more poignant and goal-oriented. So if we want to reduce our mobility, and if we want to travel from Paris to New York for 10 euros, then it doesn't matter if we tell the artists they can't travel, because there's the transport ecosystem that exists that enables people to go from Paris to New York for 10 bucks. So what's important for the next months to come? We need to target the responsible players in the performing arts, in the economy, and in education. We need to bring everyone together, or training rather. We need to create a system that can work hand in hand for all of these players. We need an ecosystem that is working on a much more global level, not just the silos. So what's our challenge here? With respect to climate change, we always have to keep culture in mind, and we need to ask these questions in our institutions. For example, how can we take more of a role on, or take on the role of somebody who one would aspire to be, or an industry would aspire to be. And we also need to think about all the complex aspects of this ecosystem, this large global ecosystem. So we need to restrict people, we need to force people to do certain things. I think doing so would be a large challenge, but a challenge that we do have to indeed tackle. But we need to also leave our own bubbles, so to speak, and think about transport, think about the economy, think about all those other ecosystems that are sort of taking place, or not rather taking place, but existing alongside ours, and how we can merge these ecosystems. In order to do that, we need to identify the key players in these ecosystems. We need to approach the unions, but also the represented, or rather the politicians that have been chosen to represent these industries. And so we need to take a look at this from all of the different levels, European level, regional level, city level. We can't make decisions on our own. We need to bring actors from all of these levels together to think about the complexities associated with this topic at hand.
Il a disparu, mais on avait Aurélien Guédé de Arviva qui voulait poser une question.
Ja, sehr gerne.
Und ich sehe I believe we have a question here. I can see that there's another question here.
Wenn diese Handmeldung noch aktuell ist, dann würde ich bitte erst Big Pulse Dance Alliance bitten.
So Big Pulse Dance Alliance, I'd like to hand over the digital floor to you. Are you there?
Wenn nicht, nein, schon wieder weg, oder doch?
Oh, he appears, or she appears to be gone. Oh, hello, we see someone. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Eduardo, and I'm working currently for Big Pulse Dance Alliance, which is a conjunction of several major dance festivals in Europe that are trying to do some actions to enhance the contemporary dance sector. And one of the actions has to do with making some kind of model of touring where one person or a smaller group of people travel to a place and incorporate local artists or local participants to do some kind of open air projects. And this is these projects are being co-produced by these many different partners. But I would like to just to say that doing so is much more, if we do it with all the Julie's bicycles recommendations and all those carbon emission factors of traveling slow and so on, makes the thing much more expensive. We have to pay the artists for their time that they are traveling much longer than the other. And also for the artists, it means that they have less time to go do and work somewhere else and get some extra fee for some other things. So I feel that the biggest thing that needs to be done is really to get more money, to talk to the politicians that if you want to make touring more economically viable, you really need to enhance a lot the budget. And this has been said by everyone. But I think that reducing the carbon emissions is something that everybody can do it, and the Arts Council is doing brilliantly in helping all these organizations to do so. But I really believe it's very important that none of you think about reducing touring. This, the importance of artists, importance for them to travel from one place to the other and show their work and put their message across, especially the ones from outside Europe, cannot be diminished by having less tour. We need more funds to make tours and everyone more CO2 efficient, but not really diminish the amount of cultural exchange between cultures and countries. And I think that it's also important to think of that the contents are really another level that I don't see very much in discussions here. We're talking about a lot about carbon reduction, but I believe really that the artists are really in the forefront of bringing new ideas, new forms of sensibilizing the different audiences, different politicians, making problems show and interact with people with all these ideas about how can we really tackle climate change in our societies. So I think a lot of the dialogue has been focusing now on how can we reduce our carbon emissions, but how can we put the activist message across using art. I think is the biggest challenge that we have to face. And this challenge cannot be done only by the Europeans. It has to be done with people from all over the world, where climate change is really also affecting a lot. So, and I really feel that's very bad that the Creative Europe program has stopped giving 30% of the funding to be spent elsewhere, because now there's more difficulty for European projects to dialogue with artists and organizations from other areas, because we actually need to have this ongoing relationship in terms of putting across climate messages. And so I would like to see more discussions about contents and what is the role of arts in changing this society, rather than to think how can we save on carbon emissions or put less money for touring. I don't know if anyone has comment.
Thank you very much. And dear panelists, you're open to comment, but I would rather propose to add some more maybe question and impulses. And can we, Dan, put you back into the audience? And I would have another question from, I don't know how to spell it, Maxime Jouedé. Sorry, how do you pronounce your surname?
Maxime Guedet. He's
Jouedé. There you are. Hello. And I would very much encourage all of you to try to at some point boil it down either into a question or a position, giving the other participants as well the opportunity to address some issues here. That would be good. Thank you. Hello, how are you?
Bonjour, merci.
Bonjour.
Merci Jacob, merci Hermène pour l'organisation de cet après-midi. Maxime Guedet, du coup, je suis coordinateur général d'Art Viva, qui est un collectif.
Thank you all very much for organizing today's event. I am working on the ecological transition in my work as well.
D'incitation, elle est en fait très concrète dans les politiques publiques. Moi, à mon endroit, je vois qu'il y a énormément
I have a rather important question to ask.
De l'éco-bonification, de la conditionnalité des aides. Aussi dans l'établissement, on voit avec l'intervention de
I think a great deal about financial aid and how I can pool this aid together, how I can make a sort of conglomerate. I think a lot about providing artists with as much support as possible. So how can we bring the aid together, conglomerates of aid givers together, and artists? So what is the key here to bringing all of these players into contact with one another?
On pourra reprendre ce débat dans un cadre franco-français, si tu en es d'accord, à une autre occasion.
Maxime,
parce qu'évidemment, la complexité
to answer, I think it's easier to have this discussion in a French framework. So every country has its own cultural organization or its own way of organizing its culture.
De prendre le point de vue un peu macro sur ce que tu viens de dire, c'est-à-dire que
so if I take a look at the macro level, rather,
que sur des priorités de transition écologique, si l'Europe dit, bon, ben, nous, on
we can see that there are different priorities with respect to climate change. So, for example, Europe is saying we want to focus more on investment.
Donc, si vous voulez passer d'un système de lampes à incandescence à des lampes LED,
and that in order to do so, we need to restructure the way we do theater. For example, we need to use different stages or different material. And this is something that Herman has also mentioned. This is probably the easiest task. So changing our light bulbs is something that is easy to do. Yeah, perhaps it can have an impact. We use 5% less energy per year through this measure. However, on a European level, much more can be done. And if everybody in Europe does this, this will have a huge impact. It will impact our shopping, which light bulbs are being bought. And so these are the types of measures that, when taken Europe-wide, would have a much greater impact than just one theater changing over its lights to LED lights.
On travaille ici parce qu'on est entre nous, donc on fait travailler les artistes de la ville pour le public de la ville.
On a local level, other things need to be done. So we often see that people encourage local artists to make local projects, but in order to get their projects seen, they have to travel. And traveling is bad for the environment, as we heard. So now there's the rule that we're not able to travel more than 50 kilometers. And we only work then together with artists that are 50 kilometers away. And that's the only way we can meet that requirement. But we need to promote our artists on an international level. So a theater can decide that they don't want to change their light bulbs, but they can perhaps set other goals, for example. So if we really want to make a difference, we all need to be in agreement. We need to be clear about what we want to do in 2022, 2023, and onwards. And sometimes the different municipalities and the different cities or departments in France are in contradiction with one another. Nevertheless, what we learned in March and what we're learning today and what we'll learn in October is that we need to work methodically here. We need a very clear way forward. In order to see what everyone from all the different levels can do to contribute to our goal. we need to have a certain framework that's in place.
Aujourd'hui, ce qu'il nous faut bâtir, c'est une démocratie de la transition qui gère la question de comment on prend des décisions de manière collective.
Pit an incentive against a restriction. We need to make decisions together, which will be hard to do, but we can do that. And we also need to make difficult decisions.
De gérer efficacement la transition énergétique. Donc je reviens à ce que j'avais dit tout à l'heure sur la question d'épistémé. On réfléchit à l'intérieur d'un système de gouvernance qui n'est pas adapté.
Unfortunately, we have to understand that the way our politicians are doing things right now is not the way collectively we're going to get out of this problem.
Thank you, Nicolas. Two more questions. One question by TK. I'm not quite sure whether you're already here. There you are. I hope I pronounce it correctly. We'll wait a few seconds. There he is. Great.
I'm very happy to be part of this whole discussion. I am a freelance artist in Frankfurt, but I have a background in psychology as well. And I'm part of a team working basically coming from the scientific corner. I don't know whether you're aware of the movement of the Scientists for Future. They're the ones who back the Friday for Future movement with scientific background information. And they have just moved on to a project they call Images of the Future. I'm adding the link. At the moment, it's only in German, but it takes exactly the approach of how can we communicate, how can we use all forms of art to communicate the necessity of ecological transformation to larger audiences. And we'd be very happy to interact more closely with everyone here on this board and in this discussion. I'm very much with Nicolas, kind of like pointing out that if you have to follow a lot of regulations, yes, there will be three basically political guidelines, and finding this intersection of those different guidelines will be a challenge for everyone. I love what Annie said about the personne verte dans le Théâtre de la Monnaie. And I would be very happy to hear more about that. And maybe this would be something, especially like in Germany, there is lots of larger theaters with more than 500 people working for that theater. This would be a really interesting challenge to establish this kind of like sustainability responsible person in every theater. And that would be kind of like a real model also for smaller companies. And yeah, that's basically just a short feedback and passing it back to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If any of you wants to add something to that, otherwise we would get Detlef Groß on the stage. And
so, hallo, kann man mich hören?
Ja, man kann dich hören, man sieht dich noch nicht.
Hello, can you hear me? We can hear you, but we cannot see you yet. Oh, no, you're completely gone. No, you're back again. Now I'm back. I'm not quite sure whether what I'm trying to say is fitting in here, but just a brief statement here. I've been working in sustainability and culture for 2 years. I also participated in continuous learning programs, and I founded an initiative for orchestras as a grassroots movement founded by artists themselves. And I think it's very important to get the artists themselves on board. One conclusion that we drew, and that I like to bring up on the table again, we in culture tend to see us in a very negative spotlight. We say we have to reduce our carbon footprint and so on. Of course, that's what I've been trying to say for 2 years now, but we're also part of the solution. Culture is not consumption. We try to do things without necessarily needing resources. The wood to build a violin, for example, will be used for 300 or 400 years. So this is really sustainable. So I'd like to point out that it's not only about accusing ourselves. Here in Mannheim, where I'm in charge of sustainability at the theater or the concert hall, I am very aware of our carbon footprint, and the energy consumption of our national theater is only 10% of our water treatment or sewage treatment plant, just to give you some perspective on this. So it's important to raise awareness on a topic, but without accusing ourselves too much and putting things into perspective. Very brief regarding this topic. When looking at mobility, our sector does indeed play a major role and does indeed become very important. It's the third reason for people to travel actually after going to work or to go shopping. It's actually for consuming culture. So absolutely. But I found it interesting what Detlef said, which brings us back to what was said in the beginning of our conference today. Do we dare to imagine culture being part of the solution and not only part of the problem, which I think is a very valuable approach. Now, let me have a look to see whether there are more questions from the audience. I'll speak German now. Dear audience, would you like to interact? I see some very interesting approaches in the chat, but which seem to be limited to the chat. Dear panelists, please stay. I'd like to ask you the question again, dear Sebastian, dear Andrew, dear Markéta, dear Nicolas, and dear Annie. Let's think about what the introduction of today's conference was about with the French ambassador who gave a speech on the power of imagination and culture that we like to use to enable this transformation, which can also mean that we can have very ingenious approaches here, things that may seem unthinkable now can be feasible tomorrow. And then when we heard about the Green Deal and the European Commission, everything has to be part of the Green Deal nowadays. A deal means that there's something that I offer and something that I get in return. So if we want a Green Deal for culture in the future, what would culture offer and what would we get in return? Does it work? Did you understand the interpretation into English? Thinking about a Green Deal in culture. Sebastian, maybe you'd like to start. And if anyone else would like to build up on this, just to see some very tangible approaches. What could we offer as cultural sector and what would we get in return if we aimed at a Green Deal in culture? I've already been talking so much. I'm not trying to steal someone else's time. And I'd also be interested in listening to someone else's perspective. Okay.
Alors, je pense que tout à l'heure, il y a quelqu'un qui a fait une remarque dans le chat. La question, elle n'est pas qu'est-ce qu'on est prêt à donner.
In the chat, I read that someone said we are not ready to offer anything. Our title, Where to Land, is based on Bruno Latour and his book. And what he says is that we don't have the choice. It's an emergency that we face and that we saw again today with the inputs of some of our speakers. We face the limits, the boundaries of our planet. We don't know how to move on. Everything speeds up more and more. Data shows that sea levels rise and that future wars will be about resources and ecological disasters. Of course, we are not trying to be too pessimistic, but that's the reality. Also, the conflict that we are currently facing in east of Europe, it's also in some part a conflict about resources. So it's too late to ask ourselves what we are able to offer or to give. It's about asking ourselves how we can prevent the poorest from being banned to speak, to raise their voice, to be heard. How can we make sure that arts and culture is not only an elite where only those participate who can afford it, because not everyone will be able to afford it. It's our responsibility today to think about this. It's about connecting the ecological transformation and asking ourselves what's the role of culture and how we can engage the poorest and make sure that they can still participate in culture. It's an ethical question.
C'est le défi qui est en face de nous. C'est-à-dire, on pourrait très bien gérer la transition énergétique de manière radicale.
And that's a true challenge, this ethical question. How to enable an ecological transformation with physical boundaries, but also taking the social dimension, freedom, ethics, and the question of democracy into account. That's a true challenge. Transformation will take place. It will be a violent change that will exclude many of us.
Vielen Dank, Nicolas. Sebastian.
Thank you, Nicolas. Sebastian.
Vielen Dank, Nicolas. Ich habe auch erst gestutzt, weil
Thank you, Nicolas.
das Bild vom Deal so griffig finde. Tit for tat, einer gibt was, einer nimmt was. Ob wir da so die Wahl noch haben.
I was a bit unsure when I heard about a Green Deal because I wasn't quite sure whether we actually have a choice. I think there are two sides that we face in this huge process of transformation of arts and culture. Our responsibility is engaging people and communicate and make culture tangible. On the other hand, it's about reflecting upon our own production conditions, because otherwise we'll have a problem of authenticity. There's a saying, change by design or change by disaster, and we still have the chance now as culture institutions, together with funding partners, stakeholders, and trying to shape our work in times of climate crisis before a very heavily increasing or skyrocketing carbon price will take away this decision from us and decide on behalf of us. So there's simply something that we have to take action now. There's something I'd like to add. Manfred. I totally agree with Sebastian. It will be difficult to wait. We have to listen to different perspectives from economy, from civil society. I think back in the days, it was considered very artistic to waste or to be extravagant, if you wanted to put it like this. This is something that has changed. Time is running out, which is why I think it's not the right approach to talk about a deal, thinking like I only want to change if I'll get something in return. I don't think that's the right attitude here. Thank you, Manfred. Is there anyone else who'd like to add on my idea of a deal? If not, let me ask a last question.
Non, j'ai le sentiment que ce terme Green Deal est déjà obsolète, quoi. J'ai vraiment le sentiment qu'on parle d'autre chose. Je crois que Je ne veux pas être alarmiste, mais je crois que l'urgence, quand même, n'est plus dans la négociation, je te donne ci, je te donne ça. Elle est effectivement, sans doute, de reposer vraiment la place que peut avoir l'art dans une société, auquel cas, elle n'est à l'abri de rien, mais elle participe.
It's not about wondering what I'm able to give or what I'll get in return. I totally agree with what Nicolas said. We have to defend the poorest and also the artists. I feel how much I'm disturbed, or how disrupting this wording is. Talking about a deal, I don't think it's appropriate. Maybe we should think about what to offer and what to get in return, but I find it very disrupting because we've rather been thinking about what's the role of art in society, and now this sounds like, well, I'll get 2 kilograms equal electricity and I'll give you 2 kilogram carbon emission. This emergency that we are currently facing may take us to such a point, but still I don't really like it. The question that Nicolas asked is the most important one. The question of social inclusion. How can we make sure that everyone participates? And what's our mission as cultural sector? I still haven't found the answer today, and I probably won't find it now.
Thank you very much, Annie. I used this question about the Green Deal as a sort of trigger, so to speak. So do we want to use economic terms for this transition in our sector? I'm not so sure. But I think it's important to learn about how the world talks about this subject. What is the world saying about the New Green Deal? And this is something that's really important in Europe. But Annie, I completely agree with you. We have to ask questions as to how viable this deal really is. I'm just going to give you a little bit more time to see if you have any questions regarding the Green Deal, but if not, then I'll ask the next question. I'll try and ask this question as simply as possible, so the interpreters have the possibility to interpret it as easily as possible. I'd like to thank the interpreters for the work that they've done today. You can imagine it's quite a difficult job, so hands together for the interpreters. What you're providing to us in the form of interpretation is an amazing accomplishment. Interpreter says, you're welcome. So our podium panelists here have a question. So we have a title for today's event that we took from Bruno Latour. We want to look towards the future. And I would like to all ask you to dare to wish something, but not wish something for yourself, but rather for those in the group. So Sebastian can wish for something for Nicolas. Markéta can wish something for Annie. Example. So, for example, I wish that for Markéta, in 5 years, she's accomplished the following. And then you fill in that blank with your wish for one of your colleagues here in the panel. So what you hope they have accomplished in 5 years. Have you understood everything? Who would like to start? Just spontaneously, I have a wish for Markéta. I hope you continue your work, but with the help of financing. So what you have described is something that you're doing all on yourself, and I really, really hope that in 5 years' time you've got funding backing up the amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. That would be so amazing. And I'd like to continue, if I can, the circle. I wish for Annie that she finds the way how to get the people, the poorest people and the poorest artists that you mentioned on board and into conversation, and that we can help her by our curatorial practices and some other projects to really achieve that, because I think that's an incredible goal to have.
Wer macht als Nächste?
Alors, moi, je vais faire un souhait pour...
So I'll continue, but I'm going to change the rules a little bit. So I want to do a wish for all of us. So at the end of today, we can all say that the next time we see each other, we'll have some goals. And so today we talked a lot about this ecosystem, and this ecosystem that we're all contributing to together. We are an ecosystem, and we need to be aware of all of our individual actions in our countries and at different levels. All of these actions have an impact on everybody else. And so the wish that I have for all of us is that we can all find ourselves around an organization, and that slowly, drawing from this resource that we've created here, we can have a real influence and impact on the European Union. So we talked about the Union today, and we talked about culture, we talked about our goals for the future, but these goals aren't really even clear on a European level. And so something that I want for the next European Union program is that this transition has a clear place in the agenda and has a real central role within the European Union's agenda. And it is my wish that all of us together as a group can have more of an impact on the deciders within our country, but also on the European level.
Thank you, Nicolas.
Thank you, Nicolas.
What would be your wish to whoever you...
So I'm not really sure how you follow Nicolas's wish and hope for everybody. Again, I think the only way to do this is collectively. I hope that we all manage to support the mobilizing of the people that we work with and to give validity to the most underrepresented voices in this conversation, to continue to platform that through culture and art, and through employment and training and education. And we all do something different. We're all representing different types of organizations, but we're all working towards a very similar goal, with very similar cultural participants. So again, for the next time we meet, and Jakob, a hope for you as well that something tangible and brilliant comes out of this, and it has a future, because this has been a great meeting of different people. So thank you for organizing it.
Thank you, Andrew. Annie, is there any wish you would... Annie, gibt es einen Wunsch, den du adressieren möchtest an...
Annie, do you have a wish for the participants here today, or are you just happy without a wish? Well, generally speaking, I'm quite happy. That's true. But to go back to Latour, we shouldn't panic people. So it's important to motivate people through positivity. All of these constraints that will be placed upon us will force us to be creative. And we need to use these spaces of constraint and turn them into spaces of freedom. And this is something that I would like to wish for us all.
Vielen Dank.
I wish that my answer was a bit funnier for you all, but it's my answer nonetheless.
Weil aus Einschränkung Freiheit machen ist etwas sehr Wunderbares. Wenn uns das gelingt, dann
I think if we can be free in a place of constraints, then I would say then we've accomplished a great deal. So that is a great wish for us all indeed, Annie. Thank you. So panelists, I'd like to thank you all very much. I thank you for taking part in this experiment here today, from your respective chairs in your different countries, for participating in this discussion. It's really important that we just keep trying new things together and work through these problems together. I'm very happy as well, Annie. I'm happy because the feeling here is a lot more optimistic than I expected it to be. I think we all know where we want to go. We're not sure about all of the exact steps, but the goal itself is clear. And I'm certain that we will be successful. Just remember our first meeting we had in March where I asked if we can do this. And now, after today, I'm sure that we can accomplish our goals. We will chart a path forward. I can't imagine us not achieving our goals here. As similar as it is for you imagining a world without culture, I couldn't imagine us not reaching our goals here today. So I'm leaving this on a very optimistic note, and I'd like to thank you very much for going on this Bruno Latour trip with us all today, so to speak, and coming together, because we have to. We can't imagine we can, or rather accept that our future is just dystopian. So let's keep talking about utopias. So I'd like to thank you very, very much. I'm going to do a little wrap-up now, and then Herman and Manfred will close things off. I'd like to thank our speakers here today, Annie, Markéta, Andrew, Sebastian, Nicolas.